Hi, friends. This is your pal, Scott Garibay. And today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. And we are going to talk about we're going to talk about what I learned at an absolutely amazing, fantastic panel at the amazing, fantastic Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. It's short, the acronym is PAGE. They just had their second year. I cannot recommend this highly enough. I really recommend you get out there. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. All right. So I went to Justin Alexander's phenomenal panel, Opening Your Gaming Table, and it really opened my mind to what we mean by opening your gaming table. And so one of the things I think is one of the reasons I love being in tabletop role-playing games is there's no cap for complexity. The things that we talk about, just other groups in the world don't have the capacity to talk about things like this at the length that we do. So I want to get into this. So who are we opening our gaming tables to? And this was so basically Justin Alexander talked about it from the perspective of the difference between a dedicated gaming table. Everybody there went through a session zero. Everybody there is there for 2 years. Everybody there has their own books and their own dice. They're dedicated. And the same players show up every week for 2 years until the campaign's done. It's a dedicated player table. He talked about an open table. Now, what is an open table? An open table is, hey, I don't care if you've never played D&D before. I don't care if you played D&D for 50 years. On Sunday, I'm playing D&D, and you can show up or you cannot. And this game is going to happen whether you show up or not, right? And so, and that's incredible. That's a completely different space, okay? But what it really, and he did talk about this to some extent, but who is the table open to, okay? And he didn't break it down this way, but one of the reasons why I go to panels is to unlock my mind, right? And these groupings were in my mind, and I want to talk to you about these groupings right now. So what are these groupings of people who can come to an open table? Okay, so the first is marginalized groups, marginalized people, okay? Now, first of all, I don't need to spend 2 more seconds on this, and the reason why is it's been covered extensively all over the internet and in every panel and at 2 to 10 panels in every con that's been held in the last 10 years. So LGBTQ, people of color, gender, I don't need to tell you that you guys need to include them at your table because we've been telling people that for 10 years, okay? And I think in many ways we've accomplished it, right? So, but that is one group, marginalized people, okay? Next, there's 3 other groups that are rarely talked about, if ever, right? And I want to talk about them because it really brought to mind these, this panel made me think very deeply about these 3 other groups, okay? So marginalized groups. I don't need to say another word about that. It's already covered, okay? All right. By people much smarter than me with much better channels, okay? If you want to know how to include them at your table, go there, right? Because it's been covered ad nauseum, okay? All right. So what are the other 3 groups? Offensive players, bad players, and muggles, okay? Now, what I'm going to talk about today is the difference between offensive players and bad players, because we are not talking about this subject enough. We're conflating them, and some groups aren't even dealing with them, okay? All right, so what is the difference between an offensive player and a bad player? We need to define these terms. Okay, so let me explain. What is an offensive player? Okay, here we go. An offensive player shows up at your gaming table and says a remark about physical intimacy attributes of one of your players. Hey, I just showed up. I appreciate that you wore that particular piece of clothing, which is revealing. And they would say it, much more charitably than that. Oh, yeah, it's great. I like being at the table with you. Blah blah blah. Offensive remarks about physical intimacy. That's one thing that's one type of offensive player. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, you paid attention, and you and you actually got LGBTQ people at your table, you got people of all gender at your table, and you got people of color at your table, right? And then some person comes in, and oh my goodness, look at that! You have two white players and an African American player and an Indian player, and and get this, that player always heals the white players. The new player, the offensive player, always heals the two white players. It just runs out of spells when it's time to heal the African American players' characters or the Indian players' characters. That's an offensive play. That's another type of offensive player. Okay. The last one. So that's two. Yeah. Oh, and then yeah. So so then the third type of So the third type of offensive player, you bring the player in, and you have someone who's LGBTQ at the table, but they don't announce that at the beginning of the game, right? Because that's not obvious all the time, right? And so your new player is like, you're like, oh, I'm gonna attack the goblin, and they're like, well, you have a long sword and you have a dagger, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna attack with my dagger, and you don't say why, right? And then that person says, oh my goodness, and then it says a three-letter word that starts with a G and ends with a Y that we said a lot in the 80s. That people said a lot in the 80s, right? I didn't say that. I never said that. But people did say that a lot in the 80s. You would hear it in any high school, right? Oh, that's good. And then they would go and say this terrible thing. Offensive players, okay? Are our tables open to offensive players, okay? Here's what I'm going to say about that. Right now, at the industry level, at the community level, at the industry level, and at the community level, at the Dungeons & Dragons industry level, at the Dungeons & Dragons community level, the answer is no. We never allow offensive players at the table. And you're like, well, of course, Scott, nobody's going to play with offensive people. Actually, I don't think the conversation ends there. I think there's a broader conversation to have, right? And the reason why we're talking about open tables, who are they open to? Oh, well, of course they're not open to offensive play. They're not. Of course they're not open to offensive people. And I'm like, why not? Well, because that would offend the people at the table. Well, wait a second. And I think the reason why I don't think I'm not saying the answer is yes. We're not there yet. I can't say the answer is there. I can't say yet that the answer is yes, because it will offend too many people, right? Like, it would make people very upset, right? But here's my point, right? The reason why this is still an open conversation for me, and why this conversation has been closed for others, right, is, let's get into this. Okay. So why do I think the conversation is, I'm not saying the answer is yes. I understand we have not progressed as a culture far enough to say that the answer is yes yet, right? And the reason why is, if you ask any D&D Dungeon Master, if you ask any D&D Dragon Master, if you ask anybody in the industry, would you include these offensive people at your table? Their harsh, quick, knee-jerk response would be no, right? I don't know. Now, wait, what do you mean, Scott? What do you mean, I don't know? Why on earth would you include any of these people at your table? Well, I think Dungeons & Dragons can fix them. I think Dungeons & Dragons can fix them. I believe that Dungeons & Dragons is a human improvement engine. I believe that Gary Gygax built Dungeons & Dragons as a human improvement engine and released it on February 7th, 1974 to literally fix humans, right? Like, I really feel that there is a improving, growing, transformative power in Dungeons & Dragons that does not exist on any other narrative method that humanity has ever created. Like, and not in a small way, I mean in a huge way. Like, it can literally fix people, okay? But I'm the only person in the world who believes this. However, well, I guess in some way, however, increasingly, I'm not, right? There are increasingly people who are coming and saying exactly what I'm saying. There are channels within the last year, multiple channels that are saying D&D is not a game. I'm not the only channel saying that anymore, right? And if it's not a game, then what is it? Is it a tool? And if it's a tool, what can it do? You understand where I'm going here? Right? So that's my point, is the easy answer is no. But the hard answer, right, is maybe it's yes. Right? Why would we risk offending players at the table? Because the reality is Gary built this thing, right? We are, people who play Dungeons and Dragons, we are a different type of human, a human that has never existed ever. We have people in our community have watched the sunset rise on 30 worlds, who have 300 identities, 30 identities, right? They have 3 or 30 or 300 identities. They've been able to swap intellect, emotion, wisdom, experience, memory, all these things out, in and out. There's this transformative power in Dungeons and Dragons, right? And if that's the case, maybe you keep a complete outrageous jerk at your table, knowing that if they stay there for 6 months and people absorb those horrible insults, that person could be fixed. Literally join the good aligned humans rather than being in the evil aligned humans. Do you understand that? That's powerful. That is wonderful. And I think it may be possible. I know that even bringing this subject up is upsetting to people. They're like, that's outrageous. I would never allow a player at my table to say something offensive to another player. What if those other players at the table know the power of Dungeons and Dragons and are going, yes, I'm going to have to absorb, horrible insults and, and I'm going to have to absorb horrible insults and hear terrible things, right? But maybe I'm strong enough to endure that, to pull a person from their own personal hell and to pull them out of, these hell gates that they've descended into of prejudice and horror, personal horror. I think the answer might, I'm not saying it's yes. I'm saying it might be. It might be. And if you believe what I believe, that Dungeons and Dragons has this improving, this growing, this transformative power, then the answer isn't automatically no anymore, right? Apologies. I thought I was going to get to bad players in this video. I'm just going to be covering the offensive players. And that's my point. The easy answer is no. The simple answer is no. But hey, man, you and me knew Gary Gygax, right? We either were in the proximity of him when he was alive, we either knew him personally, or we know his legacy today. And easy and simple is not part of our world, right? It's not easy to slay dragons. It's not simple to slay dragons. Gary brought us there and said, let's slay dragons at the table and beyond the table. Literally on every dungeon magazine, it said Mastering the Dungeon and Beyond. Gary wanted us to take what we learned beyond the table. Let's think about this. Let's think about this. Thank you. Every single word you just heard in this video is my humble opinion. Not a thing more, not a thing less. The important part is when I hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.